In the past few years, Lumix has finally gotten face detect autofocus in most of their top line cameras, and it seems like going forward, face detect autofocus is going to be the new gold standard with Lumix cameras. But I did want to break down all of my personal settings for autofocus, the different tracking modes, and everything in between, and what I personally recommend and when I recommend using what different settings. So let's dive right into the menu system. So the first thing is you want to make sure you switch that top dial to your video mode, and then go into your menu settings. You want to make sure that you have turned on your AF plus your MF on the gear icons page, and then under manual focus assist, you want to turn on your autofocus mode to on. This allows you, when you have your autofocus and it's autofocusing and maybe it's a little bit slow, you can physically override the camera lens by pulling the focus ring on your lens, and it will be manually focusing, and then when you stop doing that, it'll go back to autofocus. Then a little bit further down, you want to turn on quick autofocus. This just makes your autofocus a little bit more snappier, so when you put your hand in front of your camera and back, it'll be a little bit quicker. Then continuing down into operational modes, you want to go to your touch settings, and you want to make sure that touch AF is turned to AF. Now, before we get into the rest of the video autofocus settings, I do want to say that you want to switch your dial on the back of your camera from single continuous autofocus to continuous autofocus. This allows your camera just to continuously autofocus when you are filming. Now, open up your camera menu settings again, go into the video icon page and go down to autofocus. For the continuous focus, I like having the mode 2 turned on. This allows the autofocus to continuous work when it is not recording and then when it is recording. By default, Lumix cameras are turned on by mode 1, so your continuous autofocus only works when you are recording. I like seeing my autofocus work all the time, 24/7, even if I'm not recording, just so I can get a visual idea of when I'm filming a scene or right before I'm about to film a scene. So I recommend turning on mode 2. Now, before we get into some of the other settings, you can go back to your camera, touch the center of that back button, and this is going to pop up all the different autofocus tracking modes. So there are 7 tracking modes, 2 of which that you can only use in photo mode. But for the video modes, you do have one area plus, and zone, which all kind of work the same in a sense. Basically, it's one area of your screen that you are able to select and make slightly bigger, and then whatever your subject is in that tracking zone, or if it's touching that tracking zone, it will be getting tracked by the autofocus. The next one is full area, which uses the entire sensor and uses smart detection on what is supposed to be in frame. And then lastly is the tracking. This is a little tick box will appear. You could select any object on your camera, and then it will automatically track that object as long as the object remains in the frame. This is helpful if you are filming a bunch of different products and you only want one specific product to be in focus, and as you're moving your camera around, it will lock into that one single focus point. Nextly, when you have this menu system popped up, if you hit the back dial on your camera, you can turn on detection subjects. Typically by default, a human should appear during this setting, and this means you are in human subject detecting. There's 4 to 6 autofocus different modes depending on your Lumix camera. I believe if you are on the S5 II, 2X, and G9 Mark II, you do have human, body, face, and eye detection, or just face and eye. You have animal, which is also body, face, and eye, or just face and eye. You have car and motorcycle. But if you are on the S9 or the GH7, you do also get train and plane autofocus modes, but you can be a little bit more specific with all the different automobiles, including the car, motorcycle, train, and the airplane, if you want to have the autofocus be tracking the front of the vehicle, or if you want to have a side profile being tracked. So some best practices. When you are using subject tracking, I personally recommend using the body, face, and eye, and not just face and eye, mostly because if you, for whatever reason, if your subject turns to the left or turns to the right, and it loses the face or loses the eye, it will end up going to the human body in general, and you'll be able to get better autofocus results by having all of these certain settings set up. But if for whatever reason, say you are filming a talking head like this and you do have something in the foreground like your hand, having this ends up creating the focus point being right here. So if you want it to be only specifically focused on the face and eye and not going to whatever, say this is a microphone in front, then that is when the face and eye can be used in its best way possible. Now, when you are using full area, this typically works the best when there's not a lot happening in the scene. The moment you have multiple different subjects like humans in this scene, there is a bunch of different tracking boxes. The yellow one is the one that the camera is focusing on, and then the white ones are the camera is not focusing on. Now, you can use the joystick to switch between each one of them, but personally speaking, when you are in a scene with a lot of different things going on, that is where one area plus, or zone really come in handy. Personally speaking, I just use one area majority of the time and then choose where I want my autofocus to be focusing on the majority of the entire time I am filming or recording a scene. And one areas and one area plus is what I primarily use whenever I'm doing talking heads like this, or if I'm filming interviews. I just make the box of the image focus around the subject and give a little bit extra room just in case they move a little bit left and right. This allows just the focus to be locked into that person, and for whatever reason, if the camera decides let's focus on the background, it's not going to do that because it's only focusing in this zone on my face and on my body. This works great for interviews or for talking heads like this, or if you are filming a subject, like say if you're doing a documentary or you're doing a wedding, this is great when you have just one person being focused and tracked and they are staying somewhere in the center or staying somewhere in this exact same location during that recording. But if you don't have them and they're moving around a bunch in the scene, that's when full area can really come in handy, because if they move to the left of the camera, right of the camera, they'll remain in focus no matter what, as long as subject tracking is going on and there's not a ton of good stuff happening in the scene. Hey, quick interruption. If you guys have been enjoying this content and you want to see more Lumix related content here on YouTube, you should definitely consider subscribing. It's totally free to do so. Anyways, I'll let you get back to the video. Now, jumping back into the menu settings, there's a couple more settings I do like recommending to use on certain scenarios. The first one is your speed sensitivity or your custom autofocus settings. So this is where the camera by default comes by 0 speed and 0 sensitivity. The speed basically adjusts how fast of a focus pull it goes. So if it's going from here to back to here, it's really quick. That is because of how I personally like to set it up. But by default, it is 0 and 0, and a lot of people personally like those settings. If you do want a slower focus pull, another recommended settings I would use is a -2 on your autofocus speed. So it's a little bit slower on the pull, but +1 sensitivity. This means when it detects something, it will detect it and slowly move over to it. The next setting is focus limiter. I personally don't use this setting a lot, but for whatever reason, say you do have something that's gonna consistently be right here in front of the frame, you can set your focus limiter to here, all the way to here. So that means only things in this range will be set in focus, and anything outside of that range, the focus will not be pushing or pulling from it. So you don't have to worry about your autofocus jumping all the way to the background or all the way to the foreground. Now, the last two personal settings that is worth using. The first one is if you want to show and hide any of your tracking modes. Personally, I don't use zone, or I tend not to use tracking all the time. So if I don't want to see any of those tracking modes on a shoot, you can go down to the gear icon on the operational mode and you can hit show/hide AF modes, and then you can turn off what different modes you typically will not use. Now, the last personal setting that I do like having turned on, by default, your joystick will work with your autofocus, but if you want additional FN function buttons, so if you want to turn on silent mode, you want your peaking to turn on and off, for example, with the joystick, I go down to the operational mode, I'll drop down to the joystick, and I'll turn it to FN buttons. Now, I still do like having control with my joystick. So I press and hold the middle of the joystick button, and I changed that my function button for the joystick to focus area set. So for example, when I am filming a scene like this, and I do want to change my center of my focus button without having to touch my screen, I can just press the center of the joystick. It will pop up my focus area box, and I'm able to move that around with the joystick or using the dial on the back of the camera. I hope that was helpful for the best autofocus and tracking modes that I personally recommend. Let me know how you guys set up your camera settings down in the description below. But if you guys are curious to see how one lens is able to potentially replace 3 of my own prime lenses, check out that video right there. YouTube recommends you might like this video right here. Until next one, guys, peace.